In the crowded noise of the airport, 7-year-old Olivia bounced in her sparkly pink shoes, her tulle dress shifting with every restless movement. She stood between her parents, her mother visibly excited while Jameson remained rigid beside her, his hand tightening each time Olivia's energy rose too high. Even in a moment meant to be happy, there was already something controlled about it, something that reminded her not to cross invisible lines. They were waiting for her new brother. When the boy finally appeared, Olivia's movement slowed. He was taller than her, older, with dark hair and sharp blue eyes that didn't carry warmth. He held a single plastic bag, nothing more, with no sense of belonging following him. The woman who brought him over handed him off quickly, passing paperwork about therapy before leaving with clear relief. A quiet tension passed between Olivia's parents as Jameson questioned what kind of boy they were bringing home, but her mother cut it short, forcing the situation forward without allowing space for refusal. Olivia stepped toward him anyway, eager and unaware, introducing herself and asking if she looked like a princess, but he didn't answer, and his silence felt deliberate rather than empty as his eyes stayed on her, studying, measuring, while his hands moved in unfamiliar patterns she didn't understand. Then he grabbed her wrist and pulled her forward, and to Olivia, it felt like a game at first as she followed, laughing while they moved through the crowd, weaving between people, but the game ended when he led her into the boys' bathroom and stopped. There, he tried to explain himself by pointing to his mouth and shaking his head, then gesturing toward her, and slowly she understood that he couldn't speak. She responded with simple confidence, believing she could fix something that wasn't simple, and his expression shifted, growing sharper and heavier before he placed his hand against his chest and pointed at her, the gesture lingering longer than it should have, carrying meaning she couldn't yet understand. The moment broke when Jameson forced his way in, anger immediate and controlled, and the boy, Malachi Vize, was warned without hesitation that his place in the house was conditional and that one mistake would be enough to remove him, while Olivia was pulled away as her mother softened the situation, explaining it as harmless communication, though the tension did not disappear. On the drive home, silence settled heavily, and Malachi sat beside Olivia, watching her in a way that didn't feel casual, his gaze following details others would ignore, like the ribbons in her hair and the faint sweetness of her scent, as if he were memorizing them. At the manor, they were told they would share a room, and inside it, Olivia tried to bring him into her world by showing him her dollhouse and placing a doll into his hands, but without hesitation, he tore the head off it, the act sudden and final, and when she reacted, he didn't correct it, instead repeating that same gesture, hand to his chest and then pointing at her, reinforcing something silent and possessive. Then he reached for her hair and leaned in slowly, breathing in the scent as if it mattered, before pulling her into a tight hold that lingered too long to feel harmless, and Olivia laughed because she didn't understand what else to do, even though the way he held her didn't feel like something temporary. Later, when she gave him paper to communicate, he wrote a single word, simple in form but heavy in meaning, and even without sound, it settled between them in a way that didn't belong to something innocent. Time moved forward, but nothing truly softened, and by 11, Olivia focused on learning the piano, determined to do something right for him, while Malachi remained silent, communicating only through signs and carrying something no one explained, yet staying close to her, always within reach, always watching, and when he joined her at the piano, the moment felt lighter for a short time, almost normal, though that sense of normal didn't last. The shift came quietly, without warning, as what had once felt easy and familiar began to change into something harder to define, and when the boundary was crossed, it didn't feel like an accident, instead lingering in a way Olivia couldn't place into anything safe or understandable, and when he framed it in a way that made it seem acceptable, she didn't know how to push back, though someone else had already seen, and after that, the house changed, distance forced between them with their rooms. Placed far apart as if separation could undo what had already started, but it didn't, and it only made everything quieter. By 17, Malachi had changed in ways that were impossible to ignore, carrying himself with more control and intention, his presence heavier even without words, and people noticed him even if they didn't understand him, while Olivia noticed too, especially the way the tension between them no longer felt like confusion alone but something heavier that stayed even in silence. In her room, a small moment shifted without warning, and his control showed in ways that were firm and deliberate, his touch lingering in a way that wasn't unclear, and what unsettled Olivia wasn't only him but herself, because she didn't stop it, and part of her didn't want to, and that realization stayed with her, following her through the quiet, controlled halls of the manor. The house remained cold, structured, and watchful, their rooms placed far apart with clear intention. But distance didn't matter because at night she still went to him, moving quietly through spaces she wasn't supposed to cross, returning to something she knew wasn't right but couldn't pull away from. And somewhere deep inside, a question began to take shape, lingering no matter how much she tried to ignore it, as she wondered if any of it could be called normal. At 18, Olivia drove with tension locked in her chest, her grip steady despite the glass tank behind her. Inside it, the tarantula moved slowly, its legs dragging in a way that made her skin crawl. Malachi had chosen it deliberately, fully aware of her fear. It wasn't just a pet. It was another way to pull her into his space, forcing her attention back to him no matter how much she resisted. Since 16, his focus had changed, no longer just protective but consuming, and she felt it in everything. Memories followed without permission. Nights she barely remembered, moments where she lost control and later realized he had been the one to find her, the one who brought her back. That alone unsettled her, but not as much as the shift inside herself, the way her thoughts had begun to center around him in ways she couldn't explain. At the gas station, tension sharpened instantly. His silent gestures cut at her appearance, and she pushed back, bringing up their mother's plans and the pressure to date for status. The mention of other men changed him completely. His movements became controlled and dangerous, making it clear no one else would be allowed near her. It didn't feel like a threat. It felt certain. Inside, she ran into Edom, someone familiar enough to feel normal for a moment, but it ended the second Malachi entered. The shift in him was immediate. Control disappeared as he closed the distance and turned the moment violent. The attack was fast and brutal, leaving no space to stop it. Olivia froze, her thoughts catching on the shock and the blood, but beneath that, something else stirred, something she didn't want to admit. The force of it, the certainty, the way he acted without hesitation, it pulled a reaction from her she couldn't justify. The drive home was silent and suffocating. At the manor, the situation was handled quickly, not with fairness, but with control. Conditions were set, placing Olivia at the center of it. Her future became something to negotiate, something to exchange to keep Malachi safe. The message was clear, her role was to comply. Malachi didn't argue, but when his attention settled on her, it carried something final. Later, when their mother revealed his diagnosis, reducing him to something dangerous and incapable of empathy, Olivia rejected it. She refused to see him as something to discard, no matter what they said. That night, she crossed the distance again, moving along the edge of the manor to reach him. Inside, the air was thick with heat and the sharp mix of sweat and something warmer beneath it. When she brought up control, therapy, expectations, he dismissed it, shifting everything back to what he wanted. The spider became part of it again, used to force her reaction, and when it slipped free, her fear sent her scrambling onto the bed. He followed, closing the space, forcing the panic into silence. The tension between them became undeniable, no longer something she could ignore. When she tried to pull away, it came too late. He didn't hesitate the way she did. To him, the boundary had already been crossed. The moment lingered too long before she finally broke away, but nothing reset after it. The days that followed carried that tension forward. Distance didn't help. It only made everything quieter. The camping trip tightened it further. The confined car, the silence between their parents, the weight of everything unspoken, it all pressed in. Malachi carried the scent of alcohol and cigarette smoke, but his focus never shifted. At the campsite, separation into tents didn't create space. When their parents stepped away, the shift was immediate. Inside the tent, the air felt tight, leaving no room to escape. What started as a game quickly became something else, stripping away comfort and replacing it with exposure. His silence revealed itself as a choice, something he used deliberately, and Olivia felt the weight of that, along with the growing sense that he had always been aware of more than he showed. There were no clear lines left. When she tried to pull back, to remind him of what they were supposed to be, he didn't accept it. To him, her reactions already gave him the answer. That contradiction held her in place. After that night, he withdrew completely. The silence that followed was colder, deliberate, and it unsettled her more than his presence ever had. When she tried to provoke a reaction, nothing changed. Not until the thought of him turning his attention elsewhere forced something sharp inside her, something she couldn't ignore. That night, he returned through her window as if the distance between them meant nothing. The air carried cigarette smoke mixed with something warmer, something distinctly his. The tension returned immediately. What followed didn't feel new. It felt unfinished. Even with the risk just outside the door, neither of them stepped away. The interruption didn't break it. It only sharpened it. When the reality of her parents' plans surfaced again, when what they expected from her collided with what had already happened, his reaction settled into something final. He would not allow anyone else near her. When he finally left, slipping back out through the window, it was controlled, not rushed. The room held the trace of smoke and warmth he left behind. Olivia stood still for a moment before forcing herself to move. When she opened the door, her expression was calm, composed, exactly what was expected. Her voice steady, her posture unchanged, while everything underneath remained hidden, marked by what had just happened and the certainty that it wasn't over. Morning settled over Vize Manor with a calm that felt controlled rather than real. At breakfast, everything appeared orderly, but tension moved beneath it. Jameson pushed Malachi toward the future he had planned, while Jennifer continued weighing Olivia's suitors as if her life were already decided. Each mention of Parker or Adam tightened something in Malachi, his silence turning heavier, his control visibly strained. When they were finally alone, that restraint slipped, his intent sharpening into something direct and unsettling, though the moment was cut short when their mother interrupted, scolding him for the reckless crash he had tried to hide. The distance between them never held. It shifted constantly, pulling them together and pushing them apart in the same breath. Olivia tried to keep control, using plans and excuses, but Malachi refused to allow space for long. In the garage, the tension broke again, sudden and forceful, leaving no room for hesitation. Even with the risk of being seen, neither of them fully stopped. Olivia tried to dismiss it afterward, but agreeing to meet him later betrayed that effort. That night, she crossed the manor again, moving along the edge until she reached his balcony. Rain fell steadily, the cold mixing with the scent of cigarette smoke that clung to him. What followed was controlled and deliberate, shaped more by tension than hesitation. Olivia tried to guide the moment, but control never fully left him. Even as she tried to define it, it shifted into something darker, something that refused to fit into anything safe. Outside that space, everything collapsed quickly. At Parker's party, the polished image cracked, revealing something careless and dangerous beneath it. His behavior stripped away any illusion of control, placing Olivia in a situation that turned hostile without warning. When she tried to leave, she was stopped, the atmosphere tightening into something threatening. Panic replaced control, and in that moment, she reached for the one person she knew would come. Malachi did. The response was immediate and overwhelming. He didn't arrive alone, and what followed was swift and brutal, leaving no room for negotiation. By the time it ended, there was no doubt about what he was capable of when pushed. Back at the manor, the truth surfaced. Olivia revealed the arrangement, the money, the control placed over her without consent. For once, the balance shifted. Jameson's anger turned outward, while Malachi stood at the center of it, no longer silent in the same way. For a brief moment, something aligned between them out of necessity. The engagement with Parker ended, but Olivia already knew the pressure would simply move elsewhere. Later, under running water, the tension between Olivia and Malachi returned, quieter but unchanged. The aftermath lingered between them, reshaping how they moved around each other. Control shifted again, neither of them stepping away. When they lay together afterward, the weight of everything pressed in. Olivia admitted what she had been avoiding, that whatever existed between them was pulling her somewhere she couldn't control. Malachi's response was simple and direct, as if he didn't recognize the same boundaries, only the need to remain close. Time moved forward, but nothing settled. The house prepared to bring in a new child whose past echoed Olivia's own, while her future continued to be shaped without her. Yet within that structure, she and Malachi continued moving in ways that defied it, their connection deepening into something that no longer felt temporary. The tension broke again when Olivia chose to leave for Abigail's celebration despite his resistance. The conflict followed her through the house, cornering her in private spaces where control slipped once more. Beneath the pressure, the truth surfaced. She could not follow her parents' plans, but she also could not separate herself from him. That contradiction left her unsteady. At practice, everything fractured again. Casual rumors spread without care, but each word cut deeper than it should have. The mention of another girl, the implication that Malachi had been with someone else, shattered whatever certainty she had been holding on to. Betrayal replaced everything else, and the emotional impact hit harder than anything before it. She left immediately, anger and hurt overwhelming everything else. When she reached out to him, it wasn't controlled. It was raw and unfiltered, everything breaking through at once. She rejected him completely, pushing him away even as it tore through her. When she returned home, she expected distance. Instead, he was already there. The confrontation escalated instantly. Olivia struck out, trying to force separation, while Malachi's frustration broke through his silence in a way it never had before. For the first time, he attempted to speak, forcing out the beginning of her name, the sound uneven but real enough to stop her for a moment. It wasn't enough. The argument spilled into the hallway, building too quickly to control. Every boundary collapsed under the weight of everything left unresolved. The moment stretched too far until it could no longer be contained. Then Jameson saw them. The shift was immediate and violent. What had been hidden was exposed in an instant. Jameson moved forward to separate them, but Malachi did not respond with restraint. The conflict turned physical, escalating rapidly as control gave way to something far more dangerous. Olivia tried to stop it, but it was already too late. The fall came suddenly. The impact echoed through the house as Jameson hit the bottom of the stairs, his body going still as blood spread across the floor beneath him. The air changed instantly, filled with the sharp metallic scent. For a second, everything froze before reality settled back in. Malachi stood over it, breathing hard. Olivia moved forward, her hands shaking as she checked for a pulse and found it faint but present. Relief didn't come. Only urgency. The alarm shattered the silence. It echoed through the manor, loud and relentless, breaking whatever remained of the life they had been holding together. Olivia looked at Malachi, the weight of everything settling between them in a single, irreversible moment. Her voice was sharp, decisive, cutting through everything else as she told him to run. He didn't hesitate. He disappeared into the distance as the alarm continued to sound. Olivia remained where she was, standing over her father, her hands marked, her expression steady despite everything collapsing around her. The Vize family ended there. And Malachi did not look back. 8 years reshaped Malachi into something colder and more deliberate. At 26, he carried the past with him like a fixed point, especially the night everything inside the Vize family collapsed. Where Olivia had rebuilt a life, composed, professional, steady beside her mother in the courthouse, he saw only a surface. Beneath it, he believed something else still existed, something darker that only he had ever witnessed. Her testimony had sealed his fate, 8 years lost behind silence, and that silence had hardened into purpose. While she moved forward, he had remained fixed, and now that distance had closed, he intended to take back control in the only way he understood. From across the street, he watched her life unfold. His apartment functioned less as a home and more as a command center, screens tracking her movements, her routines, the quiet details of her days. Every morning, he followed her from a distance, the scent of cigarette smoke trailing behind him as he observed without being seen. Anyone who moved too close to her drew his attention immediately, and his thoughts toward them were not passive. To him, she had never stopped belonging to him, and the idea of anyone else stepping into that space was something he refused to accept. His intrusion into her life extended far beyond observation. He entered her apartment when she was gone, moving through her space as if it were his own, touching the objects she left behind, studying the version of herself she presented to the world. He altered small things deliberately, leaving behind traces subtle enough to unsettle her without revealing him fully. It was no longer enough to watch. He wanted her to feel him there. At night, his presence grew closer. He learned her habits, her routines, the way she unwound after long days. When she drank, he interfered, ensuring her awareness dulled, leaving her vulnerable without understanding why. What followed blurred the line between control and something he framed as care, his actions moving between calculated intrusion and quiet possession. By morning, everything appeared untouched, leaving her with only a lingering sense that something was wrong. Despite everything, he discovered something unexpected. Hidden within her private space were fragments of him she had never discarded, images, memories, remnants of the past she claimed to have left behind. It reinforced what he already believed, that no matter how far she tried to move, she had never fully escaped him. When he intercepted her plans for Halloween, something shifted. The image of her stepping outside the controlled life she had built, choosing something darker, something rebellious, triggered a reaction he couldn't ignore. It wasn't just an opportunity. It was an opening. He prepared carefully. The disguise he chose removed identity completely, replacing it with something faceless and distant. It allowed him to exist close to her without recognition, to step into her space in a way that blurred reality. From his screens, he watched her prepare, tracking every movement, every interaction, until the moment finally arrived. Before that, however, he chose to step out of the shadows. The encounter outside her apartment was brief but significant. For the first time in years, they stood face to face while she was fully aware. She didn't recognize him. Instead, she treated him as a stranger, someone new, someone unknown. The irony of it settled heavily. When she offered him her name, her number, an invitation, he accepted it under a different identity, forcing himself to respond with a name that wasn't his own. That moment stayed with him, twisting into something sharper. She had reached for him without knowing who he was. At the festival, the atmosphere was chaotic, filled with noise, movement, and distraction. Olivia moved through it in a way that stood out, her appearance deliberately chosen, something darker than what she usually allowed herself to show. Malachi watched from within the crowd, his presence hidden, his focus locked entirely on her. Every interaction she had, every glance from others, fed into the tension building inside him. When she stepped away from the crowd, the moment came. He moved quickly, closing the distance before she could react fully, pulling her into a space where the noise of the festival couldn't reach. The shift from chaos to isolation was immediate. Fear replaced confusion as she struggled to understand what was happening, but he controlled the situation with precision, keeping her disoriented, forcing her attention onto him alone. The setting changed again as he led her deeper into the darkness, into the open fields beyond the festival lights. The space stretched wide and empty, leaving nowhere to run without being seen. He allowed her movement, but only within limits he controlled, turning the moment into something deliberate, something that blurred fear and inevitability. When he finally caught her, the struggle ended quickly. The tension that followed was heavy and unstable, driven by everything that had built over years. Olivia's reactions shifted between resistance and something more complicated, something she couldn't fully separate from the fear. To Malachi, it confirmed everything he believed, that beneath everything else, she had never changed. The moment stretched too far, crossing into something that couldn't be undone. When it was over, he didn't leave space for recovery. Instead, he ensured control remained entirely his. Her awareness faded, her strength slipping away as he prepared to move her from the scene. The festival continued in the distance, unaware of what had happened just beyond its edges. He carried her away from it all. The ride through the night was cold and fast, the wind cutting through the silence as he moved further from everything familiar. The destination had already been chosen long before this moment, a place isolated enough to hold what came next without interruption. By the time they arrived, there was no connection left to the life she had been living. Only distance, and the beginning of something far darker than anything that had come before. Malachi struggled with her name long before he faced her again, the syllables catching in his throat no matter how many times he practiced alone in the farmhouse. The frustration built quickly, sharp and consuming, until he abandoned the effort and turned instead to the screens that showed her below. The basement held her in a controlled stillness, restrained and exhausted, the last fragments of her resistance fading into something quieter. When he entered, he removed the barrier from her mouth and forced her to take food and water, a distorted version of care that carried no comfort. When she woke and demanded freedom, he did not respond with softness. To him, control had already been decided. What followed was not chaos, but method. He stripped away what remained of her disguise, reducing her to something exposed and vulnerable. Her attempts to negotiate, to redirect him, only reinforced the imbalance between them. When she invoked the idea of him as someone who would come to save her, the irony broke through his restraint, pulling a rare sound from him, something close to laughter. For a moment, he allowed her a partial truth, lowering the barrier just enough to meet her eyes without revealing everything. Even then, he did not release control. The tension in the basement shifted into something heavier, shaped by fear and endurance rather than open struggle. Her reactions blurred under pressure, her body responding in ways she could not fully control, reinforcing the dynamic he believed had always existed between them. He marked the moment in ways that erased the distance of the past 8 years, not as destruction in his mind, but as confirmation. Yet beneath it, something else remained unresolved. His anger toward their mother, toward the past, and toward the choices that separated them fed into everything he did, while at the same time, his dependence on Olivia pressed just as strongly. When he introduced the spider, it became more than fear. It reflected how he saw himself, something others rejected, something misunderstood. He forced her to face it, to endure it, while he struggled again with her name, the sound refusing to come cleanly until the rhythm of his control steadied it. The moment stretched until it finally broke. Afterward, the shift was immediate. The basement no longer held the same purpose. He released her from the restraints and carried her from it, the violence fading into something quieter without disappearing. In the bedroom, the atmosphere changed, not safe, but altered, as if he were trying to rebuild something from what he had broken. He cleaned her carefully, removing the evidence of what had happened, his actions moving between care and possession. When he lay beside her, the past returned in fragments. Childhood, the early closeness, the point where everything changed into something neither of them could name. He had never wanted the role given to him. He had wanted something else entirely, and now it was still within reach. When she woke, everything shifted. Recognition came slowly as she removed what separated them, revealing him fully. For a moment, he hesitated, unsure if the moment was real. But her reaction was not fear. It was something softer, something that disarmed him more effectively than resistance ever could. She touched him as if confirming he was real, and in that contact, something inside him changed. What followed carried a different weight. The connection between them was no longer one-sided. It became mutual, breaking through years of silence and distance. For the first time, his voice found partial clarity, shaped by effort rather than control. In the quiet that followed, truth surfaced. He revealed what had been misunderstood, that she had always been the only one. She admitted what had held her back, fear not only of him, but of the world that would never accept them. For a moment, it seemed as if something could settle. But it didn't. When he offered a future, removed from everything else, she refused. The reality of their father, the weight of society, and the truth of what he had done stood between them. She chose to leave, even as it broke something in both of them. He tried to stop her, dropping everything else and reaching for her with nothing but what he felt. His voice pushed through, forming her name clearly after years of failure, asking her to accept him as he was. When she still chose to go, it broke the last restraint he held. And still, he let her. Outside, Olivia forced herself back into the life expected of her. The wedding approached like something suffocating, Xander's control becoming impossible to ignore while her mother remained fixed on status. Her father, changed and quieter, offered something unexpected, revealing Malachi's attempts to change, therapy, an effort toward control. That truth stayed with her. When the ceremony began, everything closed in at once. Then it broke. She stepped away from it completely, leaving behind everything decided for her, running toward the only place that still felt real. The farmhouse waited. Malachi stood there when she arrived, no longer hidden. When he spoke her name this time, it came clear and steady. She reached him without hesitation, closing the distance she once forced between them. What followed was not simple, but it was chosen. Together, the world they stepped into was not safe or accepted, but it belonged to them. The past remained, as did what they were, but something shifted. He was no longer driven by revenge. That had never been the truth. What he had wanted was her. He once believed he wanted to destroy what she had become. Instead, he only wanted her back. And now, finally, she was. Olivia chose him, and he intended to keep her. The end. Or maybe not.